If you want a symbol of the most divisive issue in Australian politics today, then look no further than this immigration detention centre in suburban Sydney. Because behind the fence and the locked gates are people who entered Australia illegally to seek asylum. And across this country there are thousands of people being held in centres like this as their asylum claims are being processed. Now, journalists are not allowed access to this centre or any of the others, but what is happening to asylum seekers raises serious questions about Australia's sense of itself and its future. Desperate people run enormous risks to get to Australia. 4 months ago, a boat carrying close to 100 would-be immigrants, men, women and children, was smashed into rocks on Christmas Island off Australia's northwest coast. More than 30 people lost their lives as islanders watched, helpless. These images horrified Australians. They were confronted with human suffering many would prefer to ignore. Australia does not want these boat people. Those who survived the disaster were detained on Christmas Island, inside this sprawling detention centre. Their claims for asylum are being processed. It could take months, even years. In February, some of the shipwreck survivors were escorted from Christmas Island to Sydney, just for a couple of days, to attend the funerals of their family members who perished at sea. Among the dead, men, women and children whose journeys began in Iran and ended in this suburban cemetery. One of the mourners was Hussein Husseini. He survived the shipwreck, but his wife and baby son were drowned. While in Sydney, the Christmas Island shipwreck survivors were held in Villawood Detention Centre. Journalists aren't allowed in, but one visitor surreptitiously filmed an interview with Hussein before he was transported back to Christmas Island.
همه اعصابا داغون، واقعا اعصابا همه خرابن. نمیخوام واقعا برگردیم. نمیخوام واقعا برگردیم. فامیل داریم اینجا. هر چقدر آدم بیشتر بتونه دور و بر فامیل آشناش باشه، فراموش میکنه مسئله رو. خورده کمتر فکر میکنه. درسته این مسئله فراموش نشدنیه، واقعا نمیتونه، ولی خب کمتر میتونید فکر کنید. خدا شده شبایش که اصلا خواب نداره. همه صحنه جلو چشامونه.
My children put the flower, they tell me, Tina's tell me, Mom, that's the Hussein and Maryam, and this one the baby.
Maisa Al-Jadri was Hussein's closest childhood friend, and she mourns the loss of his wife and child. Maisa lives in Sydney, a new Australian citizen who arrived with a previous wave of boat people. She's now desperate to help Hussein win asylum.
He doesn't have anything now. His child gone, his wife gone, his heart gone. We must understand. When you lost your love, how you feeling? Especially when you put baby in the funeral. That's his first child. And he talking about his child.
What is your message to the Australian government, to the Immigration Minister, Chris Bowen?
Just I want to say to Minister, I thank you for everything you do for us. I know a lot of things you did it very good for us. And I know you have result for what you doing. Maybe we can understand that because you minister and you have big country, you must look after all the problem of this country. I understand that. But I just want to say, if you bring them to Sydney with us, that's little things for you. You must help them. These people coming for nice future. Don't keep them in Christmas Island. Christmas Island and detention center, not nice place for them. These people coming to free country, free life. Don't keep them on Christmas Island.
Immigration has become a political battleground in Australia. Never mind their relatively small numbers, the boat people are in the middle of it. The last Conservative government was hard-line. Refugee boats were intercepted and turned away by the Navy. A policy dropped by the current Labour administration. It has become a defining policy difference. There's an irony here. The Australia currently preoccupied with the threat of illegal immigration is a country built by generations of immigrants. The mix of people on the streets of Sydney's western suburbs tells the story. Vietnamese immigrants rub shoulders with Afghans, Lebanese, Iranians and Iraqis. Business leaders say immigrants are vital to the country's continued economic growth. 160,000 were welcomed last year. The vast majority were given entry as skilled workers or students. Those who come as refugees are supposed to go through a screening process. Unauthorised immigrants, boat people, are seen by many Aussies as queue jumpers, and that is where the anger kicks in.
On Sydney's 2UE. Now, David Oldfield, live.
13:32 is the number, 6 minutes past 11 on 2UE morning program with David Oldfield.
Tune in to Sydney's talk radio stations and you hear plenty of Australians convinced that immigration now poses a threat to their culture and values.
So in that, I welcome to the program Steve Sackur, who is the journalist and presenter of HARDtalk, a current affairs interview program on BBC World News. Thanks for joining us and thank you for choosing our program.
David, it's a real pleasure to be here. Here's the thing. To me, there is a very interesting sort of paradox that a country built by immigrants is now so divided and polarised on the issue of further immigration. And for the next hour, I got an earful of strong opinions.
George?
Yeah, I think the problem basically comes about because we've got a disproportionate amount of people who don't want to integrate, and obviously I'm referring particularly to the fundamentalist Muslims.
Cameron, hi, go ahead.
I had to drive out to Camberg yesterday, and I got to tell you, I was surprised. I felt like a foreigner in my own country. These women that wear just slits for their eyes, I mean, that's barbaric tribalism that goes back thousands of years. That's not in touch with the modern world.
Paul, hi.
I'm quite sure if somebody did some investigations and asked the Australian people, not whether you were born here, but the actual Australian people, if they wanted the amount of immigration to keep going the way it is, it would be firmly against.
Mohammed.
Yeah, mate. If you want people to be part of this country, you've got to make them feel part of this country. And people like you, David Oldfield, you actually play to the lowest common denominator of people.
What, yourself included, Mohammed?
You're an exclusionary person, mate. That you target minority communities is absolutely ridiculous.
So, is radio host David Oldfield simply deepening divisions within Australian society? Why is it that so many people in your audience seem so full of fear and or anger when it comes to immigration?
Well, they've had a lot of what they see as inappropriate immigration in all its forms. Multiculturalism, the supposed situation of those seeking asylum, sometimes real, sometimes not. They've pretty much had that jammed down their throat for a number of decades now. A lot of Australians say, look, we didn't ask for multiculturalism, it was just forced upon us as a policy. In fact, there's been many who have called for a referendum to find out whether such should continue.
That's not true, is it? I mean, multiculturalism was a cross-party consensus for years in Australia. It's a democratic country, that's what people voted for.
Well, no. I mean, after it was introduced by a single party, which, by the way, was wiped out in the biggest federal landslide in the nation's history back in 1975. But
it was consensus. For a long time, it has been a consensus in Australia that multiculturalism makes sense to make Australia work.
By the political parties, not by the people themselves. And that's been clear in every poll that's been taken in the last 30 years whenever the issue of immigration comes up.
So you're saying across the parties, the politicians of Australia have let the country down? Is that what you're saying?
Certainly on this issue, very much so.
It should be said for our audience that you speak from the point of view of a very small minority. You were for a time in the New South Wales Parliament a representative of One Nation. Now, One Nation was a very extreme party in Australian terms, and it never succeeded in making a national breakthrough.
Well, it's extreme in your view. I haven't had anything to do with the organisation for over 10 years, and once again, I still don't step back from having been a member. This is not a One Nation issue. Now, people try and make it into a One Nation issue. It is an issue of people being upset with what they see as inappropriate immigration practices. And regardless of what the political parties will say, there has been a great deal of concern for this amongst large numbers of Australians, and that can be seen in all of the polls that have been taken over many decades.
Most of the callers we heard today were deeply concerned about immigration, but particularly about Muslim immigration. We had a couple of callers who were self-identified Muslims, whose message was very clear. They said, we are Aussies, we're proud to be Aussies. It may take Muslims time to integrate into this country fully, just as it's taken other ethnic groupings time to integrate fully into this country, but give us time. Is your mind closed, or when you hear those calls, do you reflect and consider that maybe they're right?
No, I'm hopeful that they are right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that they're not right. They may be speaking for themselves and for other Muslims that are decent, law-abiding Australians that do feel that way, and I'm hopeful that is the case, because for us to be a cohesive society, that is exactly the sorts of views, but not just views, the actions that we need to back up those views to take place.
A final thought. If one looks at the demographics of Australia and the continued lawful immigration into Australia, there is no doubt that over time Australia is going to become less white and less Christian. Do you have a problem with that?
Not as long as we have a society that is cohesive, which I don't believe we have currently. It's breaking down rather than uniting, and not as long as people are law-abiding and they adopt that which we see generally as being the Australian culture.
Well, that's a way of saying, yes, I do have a problem with that. Why not be honest about it? You have a problem with it.
I'm not being dishonest. I have a problem with multiculturalism.
Well, I have never been back from it. A much simpler, direct question. Do you have a problem with Australia becoming less white and less Christian?
No.
David Oldfield, thank you very much
for
being on Hard Talk.
Pleasure.
Good afternoon, Miss
If you want to see the changing face of 21st century Australia, spend a morning at Fairfield Primary School in Western Sydney.
7, 0.
Here, multiculturalism isn't abstract social theory, it's daily reality. Thanks to the latest wave of immigration, legal and not, 93% of children here are from non-English speaking families. Many are Muslim. The first priority here is to teach the children English.
You roll the dice.
It's seen as the first step on the journey to full integration. Chris Bowen, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
From the perspective of an outsider, there's a basic confusion here because on one level Australia desperately needs migrant labour and invites these people in, but on another level the country seems preoccupied almost to the point of fear with people getting to this country without authorisation.
I think there's a couple of issues. Firstly, yes, we do need and have skilled migration, a very heavy skilled migration program for economic purposes, and we have labour shortages and skill shortages, and so we feel.
So you need still more. You need, let's face it, hundreds of thousands of immigrants every year.
Well, we have about 168,000 a year at the moment. Then you have and then you refer to the issue of what we call irregular maritime arrivals, or in a common parlance, boat people who arrive on boat and claim asylum. We're not alone there. Plenty of countries around the world face similar issues. I think the Australian people take a generous approach to refugees. We have the third highest intake of refugees in the world and the highest per capita. But there's also a concern to say, well, if people are arriving by boat and they are not coming through an orderly process, they are in many ways not coming in the proper way. They should wait in a refugee camp and then Australia will come and get them.
So if that's the stance you take, I'm a little puzzled as to why you reversed the decisions of the previous government. They took a strategic decision to turn away the boats. They called it the Pacific Solution. They sent the people that came in on the boats to Nauru or to Papua New Guinea to be processed there.
In our view, that didn't work. Their policy was, in effect, to make the regime more harsh, more punitive, to discourage people to come. Now, we have a view about how you can deal with irregular maritime arrivals, but that's not it. That's not a humane way of doing it.
No, but to be clear, it did work. I mean, the numbers went down.
The numbers went down, but that coincided. If you look at the numbers, numbers of refugees coming to Australia almost exactly parallels crises around the world. So when you saw Afghanistan return to a much more peaceful situation, for example, the number of asylum seekers to Australia fell. In 2008, when Afghanistan returned to a more violent situation, numbers rose again. So I think...
Well, I don't think it's just about that, is it? It's about the message to the people smugglers. The message was that you can put people in the boats, you can try to get to Australia, but under the Howard regime, you will not make it to the Australian mainland.
No, well, see, that's not right, because they did process people in Nauru, and then 90% of those people ended up in Australia anyway, because where else were they going to go if they were genuine refugees? So basically, it was a refugee processing centre, which happened to be offshore, and then people came back to Australia. And the people smugglers knew that and sold that message as well, to say, yes, you'll have to go to Nauru, for example. There are worse places to go, and then you'll end up in Australia anyway.
You're getting flack, let's face it, from both sides. You get flack from the opposition because you reversed their extraordinarily tough policy, but you get a lot of flack from human rights campaigners, from representatives of refugee groups inside this country, because of how you still treat the people inside the detention centres for unauthorised immigrants. Are you satisfied with the way you treat them?
Yes, I am. It's never easy, and they're not easy, pleasant environments. But you're right about the politics of it. When you're a party, a government, which treats things on a case-by-case basis, we have on the right people saying you should be tougher. On the right, you have people say we should accept no refugees. On the left, we would have people say anybody who claims asylum should be accepted as a refugee. You shouldn't have a process. Well, I and the government has a different view. We accept those who are genuine and we reject those who are not.
Sure, but you don't do it just because it's the middle course. You do it because, and you've said it publicly, that you want to do the decent, right thing. So let's talk about decency. You made a pledge last October that there would be no children held in these detention centres. There are still 1,000 of them.
No, what I said was we would move the majority of children out of detention by June, and that's exactly what we're doing, and we're on target to do that. I've moved 123 out, approved their removal so far.
Well, there's still 1,000 in.
And what we've done is we've sourced other accommodation for them, but you don't source accommodation for 1,000 people overnight. That program is working well. We're moving people out of detention into the community.
These are kids, these are minors, all under 18, many of them appreciably under 18, who are suffering the most incredible mental stress.
I think it's also important to remember that in our detention facilities we have psychological care, there's significant medical care, and that people receive regular psychological assessments. So it's not as if they are not cared for or they're in some sort of punitive penal regime. They are in a regime where they are held while their identity, health, refugee claims and security checks are being processed.
But Mr Bowen, why wouldn't you let us in to see if all of that's true?
For privacy reasons, we don't let media film or photograph detainees because that may affect their claim for asylum.
But we've spoken to many of the families of detainees, and indeed there are some detainees who've since emerged who all say they would love the media to be able to go inside and see the conditions that there are inside. And as an accountable, democratically elected government, isn't it incumbent upon you to let, never mind me and HARDtalk, but let the Australian media see what is going on inside these detention centres?
Well, we certainly release information about our detention centres. We have a very accountable regime. We have plenty of facts and figures that get announced and released about the health of our detainees, etc. But while people are in detention and their claims are being considered, it's appropriate that can occur without that being diluted by talking to the media.
You've made a very big point of delivering a message to Australians saying we are a multicultural country. We should be proud of it. And multiculturalism as a strategic choice is what we are going to stick with.
Yes.
Now that flies in the face of a very strong message coming from other Western governments, thinking Germany, United Kingdom, who've publicly declared, David Cameron, Angela Merkel, that multiculturalism as a policy has failed.
It does, and very deliberately so. The reason for that speech was because I thought it was important that Australia be in that debate and have a different voice to those. Now, I must say, and I said in the speech, we have a different type of multiculturalism to Germany in particular. Well, in Australia, we have a very clear policy, and have had since the 1970s, of respect for the cultures of those who've come to live here, underpinned in return for respect for the traditional Australian values of tolerance, freedom of religion, rule of law, democracy, equality of the sexes, standard, if you like, Western sets of democratic norms. Now,
I think all countries, when they invite immigrants in, and they all say, "Oh, well, we understand you're coming here on the basis that you accept our values."
Well, I think
that's boilerplate.
Well, no, with respect, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because in Australia we have had quite a developed policy built on those principles to say we want full participation in society from our migrant community. We're not a guest worker society. We're not simply getting you for economic purposes. We invite people to come to Australia. If you come, we invite you and encourage you to take up citizenship, and we have the highest citizenship take-up rate of migrants of any country in the OECD. When you take up citizenship, you take out an oath of respect for those traditional Australian values. But as part of that, we have a very clear policy of not separate engagement, but respect for traditional cultures.
As you know, it's a sensitive debate inside Australia right now. There is a discussion particularly about the rate of Muslim immigration to this country, and there are people, maybe political opponents of yours, who say that Australia has to be very watchful.
Muslim migrants don't come to Australia, almost without exception, to change our values. They come because of them. Why do Muslim migrants come to Australia? Well, for a whole range of reasons. They might be economic, they might be to join family, but many of them come because of our freedom of religion.
There is no doubt, just looking at the figures, that over the next generation, Australia is going to become less white and less Christian. Is it going to become more divided as a result?
Look, every wave of migration has over the years, and I don't think Australia is probably unique in this, caused its concerns.
But you accept my premise.
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't.
You don't think, if you just look at demographics, you don't accept that Australia is going to become less white and less Christian over the next 25 years?
Well, certainly we have a diverse and non-discriminatory immigration program, and that means, will there be plenty of migrants from other countries? Of course it will. And the United Kingdom has been the key source country for Australia's migration for a long time, and we still get many, many thousands of applicants.
You do, but I just come back to the data, I come back to the figures.
Well, but when you look at our migration program, for example, currently 1.7% of the Australian population is Islamic, identifies as Islamic. If you look at our migration program, the skilled migration program, the family migration program, and even the refugee program. I mean, we take a lot of immigrants out of the Middle East, a lot under the refugee program. 70% of the refugees we take from Iraq are Christian. Why? Because there's been 1 million Christians forced out of Iraq since the fall of Saddam Hussein. So we have a non-discriminatory policy. Now, does that mean that that people come into Australia of diverse religions and ethnic background? Of course it does. It's a good thing. That's what I was talking about in that speech. Does that mean that our social cohesion will be threatened? No, not if we're sensible and we show leadership about it.
Chris Bowen, thanks for being on Hard Talk.
It's been my great pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. Fairfield Primary School bears witness to both the challenge and the opportunity that comes with immigration. Their new country will do much to mould these children. Will they, in turn, help to shape Australia's future?